Story 1: The Midnight Delivery. It was a quiet Saturday night, and I was working the late shift for a popular food delivery app. I picked up a few orders and delivered them without any issues. Around 11 p.m., I got a notification for a delivery to a secluded address on the outskirts of the city. The tip was generous, so I decided to take it. As I drove out of the city, the streets became darker and more deserted. I finally reached the location, an old, dilapidated house that looked abandoned. I hesitated for a moment, but I needed the money. I grabbed the food and approached the front door. There was no doorbell, so I knocked. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dimly lit hallway. I called out, "Hello, your food's here," no response. I took a few steps inside and called out again, but there was only silence. Suddenly I heard a faint whisper, "Come to the kitchen." My heart pounded, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed the voice down the hallway, noticing old, dusty portraits on the walls staring at me with lifeless eyes. The air was thick with a musty smell, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I reached the kitchen, which was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. A man was sitting at the table, his face hidden in the shadows. "Put the food on the table," he said in a raspy voice. I did as he asked, trying to control my trembling hands. "Stay for dinner," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. I have other deliveries," I stammered, inching toward the door. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, and I heard the click of a lock. "Please sit," the man insisted, and I had no choice but to obey. He finally stepped into the light, revealing a gaunt, pale face with hollow eyes. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. He opened the food containers and began devouring the contents, his eyes never leaving mine. As he ate, he began to tell me a story. "Years ago, I lived here with my family. We were happy until one night, a stranger came to our door asking for help. We let him in, gave him food, but he turned out to be a madman. He killed my family and left me for dead. Since then, I haven't been able to leave this house. I'm cursed to stay here forever." I listened, horrified, as he continued. "You're the first person to come here in years. Maybe you can break the curse. All you have to do is stay until midnight." I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 11:45 p.m. "Please, just let me go," I begged. He shook his head, his eyes filled with desperation. "You have to stay." Minutes felt like hours as the clock ticked closer to midnight. The man finished eating and sat back, watching me intently. Finally, the clock struck 12. The man let out a sigh of relief, and I felt a strange sensation wash over me. "You did it," he said, his voice softer now. "The curse is broken. Thank you." The door unlocked, and I bolted out of the house, not looking back. When I got to my car, I realized I had left my phone inside. I debated whether to go back, but decided against it. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the house slowly fading away into the darkness. The next day, I reported the incident to the delivery company, but they couldn't find any record of the address or the order. It was as if the house had never existed. I quit the job soon after, but I still can't shake the feeling that something followed me that night. Story 2: The Last Order. I was working the evening shift at a small, family-owned pizza place. It was a slow night, and I was about to close up when a last-minute order came in. The address was in a remote part of town, but the customer had prepaid and left a generous tip, so I decided to take it. As I drove to the location, the streets became narrower and darker. The GPS led me to an old, run-down apartment building. I parked the car and made my way to the entrance. The building looked abandoned, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Just as I was about to leave, the door creaked open, and an old woman peered out. "You brought the pizza?" she asked in a shaky voice. I nodded and handed it to her. "Come in, dear, I'll get your tip," she said, disappearing into the darkness. I hesitated but stepped inside, not wanting to be rude. The apartment was dimly lit and smelled of mildew. The old woman returned, holding a small, crumpled envelope. "Thank you," I said, taking the envelope. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper, help as I froze, unsure if I had imagined it. The old woman noticed my hesitation and asked, "Is something wrong, dear?" I thought I heard something I said, my voice trembling. She gave me a sad smile. This place has a lot of history. Sometimes the past lingers. I nodded and quickly left the apartment, eager to get back to my car. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to open the envelope, and inside, I found a small, old photograph of a family. The faces were faded, but the old woman was unmistakable. Curiosity got the better of me, and I did some research on the address. I discovered that the apartment building had been abandoned for years after a tragic fire claimed the lives of a family. The old woman in the photograph was the mother, who had died trying to save her children. Shaken, I decided to visit the building again, this time during the day. I wanted to understand what had happened. When I arrived, I was surprised to see that the building was indeed abandoned, just as the records had said. I ventured inside, and as I explored the charred remains, I found a small room with toys and children's drawings scattered around. The air was thick with an eerie silence. Suddenly I heard the whisper again, "Help us." My heart raced as I followed the sound to a closet. Inside, I found an old, dusty box. I opened it to find letters and photographs detailing the family's life before the fire. It was clear that the mother had been trying to protect her children from something sinister. As I read through the letters, I realized that the mother had been tormented by a malevolent spirit. She had tried everything to save her children, but in the end, the spirit had claimed them all. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a cold presence behind me. I turned around to see the ghostly figure of the old woman. Her eyes were filled with sorrow as she mouthed, "Help us." I felt a chill run down my spine as the room grew colder. I knew I had to do something to put their spirits to rest. I gathered the letters and photographs and took them to a local historian, hoping to find a way to help the family. The historian told me about a ritual that could cleanse the spirits and free them from their torment. It required me to return to the apartment at midnight and perform the ritual. That night, I gathered my courage and returned to the apartment. As I performed the ritual, I felt the presence of the spirits around me. The air grew heavy, and I could hear faint whispers and cries. I completed the ritual, and suddenly the room was filled with a blinding light. When the light faded, the apartment was silent. The cold presence was gone, and I felt a sense of peace. I knew the family had finally found rest. I left the building, feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders. I never took another late-night delivery after that, but I couldn't forget the experience. It changed me, made me realize that sometimes the past lingers in ways we can't understand, and sometimes it's up to us to help those who can't move on. Story 3: The Haunted Diner. I had just started my shift as a delivery driver for a local diner. It was a busy night, with orders coming in non-stop. Around 10 p.m., I received an order for a large meal to be delivered to an address I had never heard of. The diner was known for its late-night deliveries, so I didn't think much of it. As I drove to the location, the roads became increasingly deserted. I finally arrived at an old, run-down diner in the middle of nowhere. The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow on the empty parking lot. I double-checked the address, thinking I must have made a mistake, but it matched perfectly. I walked into the diner, and the bell above the door jingled, but no one was there. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust covered the tables, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. I called out, "Hello, I have your order." There was no response. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic set in as I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I heard a faint, static-filled voice coming from an old radio on the counter. "Welcome to Diner 66, it crackled. Please make yourself comfortable." I looked around, trying to find another way out. As I walked through the diner, I noticed old photographs on the walls, showing the place in its heyday. There were pictures of happy customers, the staff, and a man who seemed to be the owner. I reached the kitchen, hoping to find a back door, but instead I found an old ledger. It listed names and dates, all ending abruptly on the same day in 1975. I felt a cold breeze and turned to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure stepped forward, revealing a man in an old-fashioned diner uniform. "I'm the owner," he said softly. "Welcome to my diner." He began to tell me the story of how the diner had once been a thriving business. But one night, a tragic accident had occurred. A fire broke out, trapping everyone inside. the fire department arrived too late, and the diner was left to decay. The diner never really recovered, he said, his voice filled with sorrow. And neither did I, he explained that he was trapped there, unable to move on. Every few years, someone like you comes along and I tell them my story, but they never believe me. I listened, trying to process what I was hearing. What do you want from me, I asked. I just want someone to remember us, he said, to know what happened here. Suddenly, the door to the diner creaked open. I turned to see a group of shadowy figures entering. They were the spirits of the customers and staff, all trapped in the diner. They looked at me with hollow eyes, as if begging for release. I knew I had to do something. I remembered the old ledger and the photographs. Maybe if I take these, people will know your story, I suggested. The owner nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I gathered the photographs and the ledger, and as I did, the spirits began to fade. The diner seemed to grow brighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The owner smiled, a look of gratitude on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. I walked out of the diner, the door closing gently behind me. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the neon sign flicker one last time before going dark. The next day, I took the photographs and ledger to the local historical society. They were fascinated by the story and promised to preserve the memory of Diner 66. I felt a sense of closure, knowing that the spirits had finally found peace. I never returned to that part of town, but I couldn't forget the experience. It made me realize that sometimes the past lingers in unexpected ways, and sometimes it's up to us to help those who can't move on.